The first-generation Mazda 2 used Zetec Sigma gasoline engines, developed in the 90s by Ford in collaboration with Yamaha. In the second generation, their place was taken by four-cylinder units of their own production labeled MZR, which means Mazda Responsive. In fact, we are talking about 3 engines of the Z series. 2 of them had the same displacement, but differed in the degree of forcing. All of them were equipped with a timing chain drive, distributed fuel injection, 2 overhead camshafts and 16 valves. The 1.3-liter unit of the ZJ series was appointed as the base unit, which was offered in 2 power options. In terms of mechanics, both versions are completely identical. The difference should be sought in the program of the engine control unit. There are practically no differences in dynamics. The motors are highly efficient due to the relatively high compression ratio of 10:1. In addition, they were equipped with a system for changing the phases of the intake valve's SVT, sequence variable timing. Its main task is to create the effect of the so-called internal exhaust gas recirculation in partial load modes in order to combat emissions of nitrogen oxides. These units were combined with a 5-speed manual transmission F35M-R. Due to the lack of a reverse gear synchronizer, it is sometimes difficult to turn it on. The forward gears, on the other hand, stick in easily and accurately. The 1.5-liter MZR is the second gasoline unit that can be found under the hood of the Mazda 2. It received the designation ZY, and has the same piston stroke with the smaller 1.3-liter engine, 78.4 mm. But the cylinder diameter is 4 mm larger. The 1.5-liter engine is a derivative of the 1.6 MZR, Z6, which was widely used in the first-generation Mazda 3. Both are united by a cylinder diameter of 78 mm. The Mazda 2's largest engine produces a peak output of 103 horsepower, at 6,000 rpm, and the maximum torque of 137 Nm is available at a speed of just over 4,000. The 1.3-liter unit reaches its maximum 122 Nm at 3,500 rpm. The best parameters of the 1.5-liter engine give high expectations. But in reality everything looks a little different. While both versions of the 1.3-liter unit readily accelerate the car from low revs, the 1.5-liter engine is too sluggish in the lower rev range. The 1.6 MZR behaved in the same way in the Mazda 3. This is another proof of which unit the 1.5-liter engine originates from. The largest engine behaves well only at high speeds. Very strange, considering that it is equipped with a more complex air supply system with a variable length intake manifold. At low speeds a long channel is used, at high speeds a short one is used. Theory is one thing, but practice, unfortunately, is another. 1.3 MZR and 1.5 MZR engines do not use hydraulic valve clearance compensators. After a series of unpleasant episodes associated with the failure of compensators, the manufacturer has been trying to avoid their use since the 90s. Checking the valve clearance is recommended every 120,000 kilometers. In this case, an experienced mechanic will be able to determine by ear the need for adjustment. However, the process itself is not easy. Instead of classic washers, you have to change the adjusting cup, pusher. It is better to entrust the replacement to professionals. Otherwise, you risk damaging the camshaft, and then the repair will be more expensive. The oil level should be checked periodically. Mazda 2 engines do not have a level sensor that would report a critical decrease in lubricant volume. Unlike gasoline engines, all diesel units are borrowed from the French, in the PSA concern. The first 2 years of production used a 1.4 MZCD with the designation Y4, which was nothing more than the well-known 1.4 HDI, DV4. It is quite economical, but unlike gasoline engines, it requires regular replacement of the timing belt, every 120,000 kilometers or 6 years of operation. PSA is optimistic that the timing drive is capable of withstanding 240,000 kilometers or 10 years. But the Japanese decided not to risk it. The engine itself is quite reliable, thanks to a durable flywheel and the absence of a diesel particulate filter. However, sometimes a particulate filter is found, but extremely rarely. Nevertheless, despite good reviews from owners and services, it is not worth buying a Mazda 2 with such an engine. Among the common problems, it should be noted difficulties with starting. The culprit is a clogged fuel filter. It is quite expensive due to the non-separable bulky plastic case, which changes entirely, along with the filter element. In some cases, it becomes necessary to replace the seals of Siemens common rail injectors. The smell of diesel fuel in the cabin will tell you about this. The defect should not be ignored. Too much fuel in extreme cases will burn the cylinder head. In 2009, the 1.4 MZCD was replaced by the aluminum 1.6 MZCD of the DV series, also from PSA. Until 2010, it met Euro 4 emission standards, and after Euro 5. Only one camshaft rotates in its head, and only 8 valves take care of filling and emptying the combustion chambers. The reliability of the engine causes a lot of controversy. The range of problems is quite wide. From a turbocharger and a stuck EGR, to complete wear of the blockhead due to a drop in pressure in the lubrication system. Mazda of the first decade of the 21st century is excellent driving performance, high reliability and, unfortunately, poor sound insulation and poor corrosion protection. In the late 90s, it seemed that cars were finally getting rid of the brown plague, as manufacturers began to use more and more galvanized metal. So in the Mazda Z2's 9, almost 90% of the body received galvanization. Even the budget models 323 VA and 626 GE resisted corrosion well. However, the subsequent 323 BJ and 626 GF began to slowly surrender. The problem worsened after restyling in 2000 to 2001. It was during this period that the epidemic broke out, Mazda 3 and 6, MPV5. It is not strange, but Mazda 2 managed to avoid infection. There are no signs of corrosion even after 6 years of operation and 100,000 kilometers of run. No fatal crashes of the Mazda 2 have been recorded yet. But there are little things, mostly of an acoustic nature. The most common source is the suspension. Knocking sound when turning the steering wheel. It manifests itself while turning the steering wheel in place or when driving at low speed. The reason is the lack of lubrication between the inner and outer sliding surface of the steering column tube. To fix the problem, replacing the steering column is not required. Official services are aware of the defect and know well how to eliminate it. Since September 2010, a modified unit began to be installed. Rear shock absorbers knocking. The disease is rather episodic in nature and is observed only in some cars. Squeaky rear shock absorbers. More common than knocking. It is possible to get off with a banal lubricant. Play steering tips. The tips themselves are relatively cheap, but after repair, you will need to adjust the geometry of the wheels, which will cost more. Knock front stabilizer. A common problem with any car. The repair doesn't seem expensive. Malfunction of the remote control of the central lock. The problem is typical for Mazda 2 during the initial production period. As a rule, the receiver is to blame, living its own life. The defect was later corrected by the manufacturer. Mazda 2 is a pretty hardy car. This fact is confirmed by numerous reliability ratings, including TÜV. Despite the relatively poor equipment of the basic versions, there are mostly decently equipped copies on the used car market. The interior looks modern. You can only blame the car for a small amount of space in the low rear seats.